My daughter was fighting for her life on a ventilator. And my mother, yes, I have to emphasize this, the grandmother of my daughter didn't send a single message asking how her granddaughter was doing. Instead, she sent me an order, bring a pie to the party right now. Everyone is waiting. She even called me useless. My heart shattered. I never imagined such coldness and cruelty could come from my own flesh and blood. What shocked me even more was that this was only the beginning. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a drink, get something to snack on, make yourself comfortable, and remember this, the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing. They simply chose not to. Leave a 1-inch the comments, so we can continue the story, and subscribe. You're going to want to hear how this one ends. The story began with the steady, lifeless rhythm of a ventilator. It echoed through the intensive care unit. The fluorescent lights above cast a pale white glow across the room. That harsh light made my daughter's skin look gray. Emma was only 8 years old. She lay motionless beneath a web of tubes and wires. A large plastic tube was inserted into her small mouth. Her eyes remained closed. Her normally sweet face was swollen beyond recognition. It felt as though someone had wrapped a hand around my heart and squeezed. I sat beside her hospital bed on a freezing metal chair. My hands trembled as I held her tiny, fragile hand. I prayed. I prayed with everything I had left. Just let her open her eyes. Just let her breathe on her own again. I would trade my own life if I had to. My phone screen suddenly lit up. The brightness sliced through the terrifying silence of the room. I glanced down. It was a message from my mother, Patricia. I opened it. There wasn't a single word asking about Emma. Not one question about her granddaughter. Instead, the message read, "Stephanie wants a fruit tart from the bakery downtown. Buy one and bring it to the party. Everyone is waiting. Don't be selfish and useless like you always are." I stared at the words. Then I looked back at my daughter. My mind went blank. A slow burning rage rose inside my chest. My daughter was fighting for her life. She had been admitted to the hospital in critical condition. I had called my mother. I had begged her through tears to come to the hospital, and now she was demanding dessert for Stephanie's party. My sister, the family's princess, the one who had always come first. With shaking fingers, I typed a reply. "Mom, Emma is on a ventilator. I can't leave right now." Only seconds later, a response appeared. Patricia wrote, "She's just got a fever. Doctors exaggerate things to make money. You're always looking for an excuse to ruin your sister's special day. Bring the tart here immediately." Tears spilled down my face, not because I was weak. They were tears of helplessness and fury. I looked around the ICU room. There was nobody there except me and the cold sounds of machines. My family, people who shared my blood, were gathered inside a warm mansion. They were laughing, talking, raising glasses to celebrate Stephanie's birthday. Meanwhile, my daughter was barely hanging on to life. The sharp smell of disinfectant filled my lungs. It reminded me of a brutal truth. I was completely alone. The people I called family had just delivered the cruelest blow imaginable. To them, my daughter's life was worth less than a dessert. I turned off my phone. I didn't respond again. I pressed my forehead against Emma's cold hand and whispered, "Daddy's here. I'm not going anywhere." But I had no idea this was only the beginning. Their party would continue, and their cruelty would soon evolve into something even darker. A plan so heartless that I never could have imagined it. I stared at the dark phone screen. My mind drifted back through the horrors of that night. The past 72 hours had been a living nightmare. The night Emma got sick, rain was pouring down outside. She suddenly began convulsing in her bed. Her fever had climbed to nearly 106 degrees Fahrenheit. I panicked. I scooped her into my arms and rushed to the car. Thunder crashed overhead while the heartbreaking cries of my little girl echoed through the storm. The moment we arrived at the hospital, I called my mother. I needed emotional support. I needed someone to tell me everything would be okay. Instead, I was met with irritation. Patricia answered in a sleepy, annoyed voice and told me I was overreacting. She said every child gets a fever. Just give her some medicine and stop making a fuss. Then she hung up. 2 hours later, while doctors were urgently inserting a breathing tube into Emma's airway, my phone rang again. This time it was Stephanie. My sister didn't ask a single question about her niece. Instead, she started yelling. She called me selfish. She accused me of deliberately choosing the night before her birthday to create drama and attract attention. She claimed I was trying to ruin the party the entire family had spent weeks preparing. I barely had time to respond before Uncle Paul grabbed the phone from her. His voice was filled with judgment and self-righteousness. He said there was no place in this family for lazy people who enjoyed playing the victim. He told me that if I didn't want to attend the party, I should just say so instead of using a sick child as an excuse to avoid my family responsibilities. Every word felt like a knife being driven into my chest. They were gathered in a beautiful home, filled with music, warm lights, laughter, and the smell of fresh desserts. I was standing in a hospital corridor that reeked of disinfectant. The contrast made me sick. They loved calling themselves the perfect family. They constantly preached about love, unity, and loyalty. Yet when their own granddaughter was lying between life and death, they joined forces to manipulate me. They wanted me to believe I was the one doing something wrong. They wanted me to feel guilty for taking my daughter to the emergency room instead of serving guests at their celebration. During those 72 terrifying hours, not one of them came to the hospital. Not one. Instead, the calls and messages kept coming. They called me an ungrateful son. They called me an embarrassment to the family name. Their cruelty was wrapped in sweet words and fake moral lessons. Again and again they tried to convince me that I was imagining things, that I was exaggerating, that I was the problem. I looked at my poor daughter lying motionless in the hospital bed. The anger inside me had passed every limit. For the first time I realized I could not continue accepting this emotional abuse. Something had to change. What I didn't know was that my mother's coldness and my sister's cruelty were not the worst parts of this nightmare. A darker shadow from my past was already making its way toward the ICU. Someone I had once loved. Someone who had now returned with a cruel purpose of their own. And behind it all was the person pulling the strings. My own mother. The ICU door suddenly opened. The person standing there made my heart stop. The heavy ICU door swung open. The sharp click of high heels echoed across the tiled floor. I looked up. My stomach dropped. It was Jessica. My ex-wife, the woman who had abandoned our daughter and me 2 years earlier to run off with another man. Today she appeared dressed in expensive clothes. Her makeup was flawless. She looked completely out of place inside a hospital room where a child was fighting for her life. Jessica walked straight toward the bed, but she never looked at Emma. Not once. Not a single glance toward her own daughter lying unconscious on a ventilator. Instead, she folded her arms across her chest and stared at me with open contempt. The first words out of her mouth were an accusation. She called me a failure as a father. She said Emma was lying in that hospital bed because of my poverty and incompetence. I shot to my feet. I had to fight back the urge to scream for fear of disturbing Emma. I demanded to know how she even knew Emma was here. For 2 years, she had not paid a single dollar in child support. For 2 years, she had not made a single phone call to check on her daughter. Jessica let out a cold laugh. Then she revealed why she had come. She claimed she was back to correct her mistakes. She announced that she would be filing for full custody. According to her, a man who could not provide a decent life for his child did not deserve to be called a father. The pain and fury inside me became almost unbearable. She had abandoned Emma when she was 6 years old. Now, while our daughter hovered between life and death, she had returned to take her away. Every sentence she spoke was carefully designed to manipulate me. She wanted me to believe Emma's illness was entirely my fault. I looked directly into Jessica's eyes. I told her to get out. Immediately. But she wasn't intimidated. Instead, she stepped closer and whispered into my ear, "Stop being stubborn. You can't win this." Then she smiled. "I have powerful allies. People you would never expect." At that exact moment, Jessica's phone began to ring. Without hesitation, she answered it right in front of me. The volume was loud enough for me to hear the voice on the other end, and what I heard made my blood run cold. It was my mother, Patricia, my own mother. She casually asked Jessica whether everything had been taken care of. Then she told her to hurry up and finish the paperwork so they could get rid of me and remove me from the house. I stood frozen. Suddenly, everything made sense. Jessica's appearance wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't concern. It wasn't guilt. It was an ambush. A betrayal planned in advance by my own mother. The two of them had been working together all along. Patricia's cruelty had crossed every line imaginable. She wasn't satisfied with ignoring Emma's suffering. She wanted to destroy me completely. I stood alone beside my daughter's hospital bed and realized I was facing an alliance built on manipulation, greed, and hatred. But even then, I still didn't know the worst part. Jessica eventually turned and walked out of the room. As she left, she deliberately placed a thick stack of documents on the bedside table. For several seconds, I simply stared at them. Then I picked them up. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. Page after page was filled with legal language, medical records, signatures, and financial disclosures. The further I read, the colder my body became. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears, because those papers revealed something far more horrifying than a custody battle. This wasn't just a plan to take Emma away from me. The documents exposed a scheme that had been targeting my daughter herself. And the deeper I read, the more terrifying the truth became. By the time I reached the final page, I realized that Emma's illness might not be the tragedy they were exploiting. It might be the very reason they had set their plan in motion. And if what I was reading was true, my daughter's life was in far greater danger than I had ever imagined. I stared at the stack of documents on the table in disbelief. They were custody termination papers, already prepared. Attached to them were fabricated reports claiming that I had neglected Emma. My head spun. The betrayal between my own mother and my ex-wife was almost impossible to process. Before I could even absorb that pain, another attack arrived. This one was even more ruthless and completely public. My phone began exploding with notifications. Not calls, messages, dozens of them. Friends, co-workers, former classmates, and people I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly reaching out. Every message asked the same question. Is this true? My hands shook as I opened Stephanie's social media page. At the very top was a lengthy post. It had been published only minutes earlier. Attached to it were photographs from her lavish birthday celebration. There they all were, smiling, laughing, posing beside a gigantic birthday cake. My mother, Patricia, had one arm wrapped affectionately around Jessica. They looked like the picture-perfect family. Happy, united, flawless. But it was Stephanie's words that truly dragged me into hell. She wrote about all the sacrifices our family had supposedly made for me. She portrayed me as an ungrateful traitor. She claimed I had hidden my daughter in order to extort money from my own mother. According to her fabricated story, I had demanded a large payment from Patricia before allowing anyone to see Emma. She ended the post with a sentence carefully crafted to make me look monstrous. Family always keeps its arms open, but one man's greed and selfishness destroyed everything. Below the post were hundreds of comments. The numbers continued rising every second. Relatives joined in immediately. They called me a disgrace, an ungrateful son, a manipulator. People who knew nothing about the situation added their own cruelty. They accused me of exploiting my daughter for personal gain. Some even wrote that a father like me didn't deserve to exist. It was a perfectly coordinated smear campaign. They wanted to turn me into a villain in the eyes of the public, and they had chosen to do it while I sat beside my critically ill 8-year-old daughter. They used the happiness of their party as evidence of their supposed virtue. At the same time, they painted me as a corrupt and selfish monster. Thousands of strangers were attacking me without knowing a single fact. The injustice was unbearable. My chest felt as though it might burst from rage. The entire family had turned against me, without hesitation, without mercy. I looked over at Emma. She still lay motionless beneath the machines, small, fragile, completely innocent. At that moment, I realized there was no turning back. I had to fight, not for myself, for her. But how could one man stand against an entire family determined to destroy him? Then, at the lowest moment of my life, there was a knock at the ICU door. I turned around. An elderly figure slowly stepped into the room. Thin, tired, bent with age. Yet there was determination in every step. It was Grandpa Harold, my grandfather. He had traveled from another city to get here. He clutched a worn, weathered envelope in one hand. His eyes were filled with sorrow and fury. The moment he saw me, his expression tightened. Then he looked toward Emma's bed. For several seconds he said nothing. His jaw trembled. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and heavy. I knew Patricia would eventually go too far. I stared at him, confused, exhausted, desperate for answers. Harold lifted the old envelope. I should have told you this years ago. My pulse quickened. What are you talking about? His eyes darkened. The money. I frowned. What money? Harold slowly sat down beside me. Then he spoke the sentence that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. The money your grandmother left for you and Emma never disappeared. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked in place. Harold continued. Patricia took it. The room seemed to tilt around me. My mother had spent years claiming that the inheritance had been lost through bad investments. She had repeated that story so many times that everyone accepted it as fact. But now Harold was telling me something completely different. His trembling fingers opened the envelope. Inside were copies of bank statements, transfer records, legal documents, proof, years of proof. Harold looked directly into my eyes. His voice cracked with anger. Patricia stole every dollar. I could barely breathe. But Harold wasn't finished. Because according to the documents in that envelope, the money wasn't only meant for me. A large portion of it had been placed in trust for Emma, my daughter, the same little girl now lying unconscious in a hospital bed. And as Harold revealed where the money had gone and who had benefited from it all these years, I realized the conspiracy against me wasn't new. It had begun long before Emma got sick. Long before Jessica returned. Long before the lies on social media. This had been planned for years. And the people behind it would do almost anything to keep the truth buried. Grandpa Harold stepped into the hospital room. His movements were unsteady, but his eyes burned with anger. The moment he saw Emma lying motionless beneath a maze of tubes and wires, his expression collapsed. Tears filled his aging eyes. Slowly he walked toward me. He placed a wrinkled hand on my shoulder and apologized for arriving so late. I asked how he had even known where to find us. Harold let out a sorrowful sigh. Then he told me something that made my stomach turn. 3 days earlier, Patricia had called him. She told him Emma only had a mild fever. She claimed I was exaggerating the situation to manipulate people into giving me money. According to her, there was no emergency, no danger, nothing serious at all. She even told him not to come because she didn't want him exhausting himself with unnecessary travel. But Harold had felt that something was wrong. Deep down, he didn't believe his daughter, so he ignored her instructions. He got on a bus and came to see the situation with his own eyes. Once again, my mother's cruelty was exposed. She hadn't simply abandoned her granddaughter. She had deliberately lied to her own father. She wanted to isolate Emma and me from everyone who might help us. She wanted us completely alone. Yet even that wasn't the worst revelation. Harold slowly lowered himself into the cold metal chair beside me. Then he handed me the old envelope he had been gripping since he arrived. Inside were bank statements, withdrawal slips, financial records. Harold looked at me with shame and regret. Then he revealed a secret that left me numb. Patricia had stolen nearly $12,000 from him. Over the past year, she had repeatedly visited him and told heartbreaking stories. She claimed I was drowning in debt. She said creditors were preparing legal action. She insisted that if money wasn't provided immediately, I could be arrested and Emma would lose everything, including her education. Harold loved his grandson. He loved his great-granddaughter, so he believed her. Little by little, he withdrew nearly all of his retirement savings and gave the money to Patricia. I could barely process what I was hearing. I had never asked my mother for a single dollar. I wasn't in debt. The entire story had been fabricated. That $12,000 represented almost everything Harold had spent a lifetime saving, and my own mother had stolen it by using my name, by exploiting the love of an elderly father, by manipulating his fear for his family. According to Harold, the money never went toward helping me. It never went toward Emma. Instead, it disappeared into shopping trips, expensive dinners, birthday celebrations, and the endless demands of Stephanie's lifestyle. The truth hit me like a physical blow. For the first time in my life, I felt genuine disgust toward the woman who had given birth to me. Harold squeezed my hand. His voice trembled. "You have to stay strong." Then he looked toward Emma. "I'm standing with you now." His words gave me something I hadn't felt in days. Hope. For the first time since Emma had been admitted to the ICU, I wasn't completely alone. I had a witness. I had evidence. And I finally had someone willing to fight beside me. A plan for exposing Patricia's lies slowly began forming in my mind. But neither Harold nor I understood how far this nightmare would go. That evening, after Harold left for a nearby hotel to rest, I remained at the hospital with Emma. Several hours later, a nurse informed me that Emma's medication had arrived from the pharmacy department. I needed to complete some paperwork and pick it up personally. Reluctantly, I stepped away from the ICU. I was gone for only 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Nothing more. When I returned to the floor, I noticed someone hurrying down the corridor. The figure disappeared around a corner before I could get a clear look. But something about the movement felt familiar. A cold feeling settled in my chest. I walked into Emma's room. Everything appeared normal. The machines continued their steady rhythm. The lights were unchanged. Emma remained unconscious, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened. Trusting my instincts, I went downstairs and asked security whether I could review the surveillance footage from the hallway. Several minutes later, I was sitting in front of a monitor. The recording began playing. I watched myself leave the ICU. Then I waited. 9 minutes later, another figure entered the frame. The moment I saw the face, my blood ran cold. It was Patricia, my mother. She looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then she quietly entered Emma's room. For nearly 7 minutes, she remained inside. When she finally emerged, she appeared nervous. She quickly walked away without speaking to anyone. My hands began to shake. I leaned closer to the screen. Frame by frame, I watched her actions. And what I discovered next filled me with a terror unlike anything I had ever experienced. Because Patricia had not come to visit her granddaughter. She had not come to pray. She had not come to apologize. She had come with a purpose, and whatever she had done inside that room was far darker than anything I had imagined possible. I stood frozen inside the hospital security room. My eyes were locked on the surveillance monitor. The footage was replaying events from only 15 minutes earlier. The moment I left the ICU to pick up Emma's medication, another figure appeared in the hallway. It was Patricia, my mother. She looked cautiously up and down the corridor. After making sure nobody was watching, she quietly slipped into Emma's room. The security camera had no audio, but the images were terrifying enough on their own. Patricia walked directly to Emma's bedside. There was no sign of love, no concern, no tenderness. She leaned down until her face was only inches from Emma's ear. Then her lips began moving, again and again. Even without sound, I could see the hostility written across her face. The bitterness, the anger, the resentment. She was whispering something to an 8-year-old child fighting for her life. Then something else happened. On the screen, I saw Emma's fingers twitch, a tiny movement, then another. My heart nearly stopped. Emma was showing signs of waking from her coma, and the first voice she heard was not her father's. It was Patricia's. My mother continued speaking into her ear until she noticed a nurse passing the room. Immediately, she straightened her posture, adjusted her purse, and hurried out through a side exit. My entire body began shaking. Fear and rage surged through me at the same time. This wasn't indifference. It wasn't neglect. It was something much darker. Patricia knew Emma was beginning to wake up. She had chosen the most vulnerable moment imaginable to influence her, to fill her head with lies, to poison her perception of me, to damage the bond between a father and his daughter. I burst out of the security office. I ran down the hospital corridor. My breathing was ragged. The smell of disinfectant seemed stronger than ever. I felt sick, terrified. I couldn't stop imagining what she might have said, what damage she might have done. I had to get back to Emma, immediately. When I pushed open the ICU door, the machines were still humming steadily. The room looked exactly the same, and yet everything had changed. Emma's eyes were open. For a moment the world stopped. My daughter was awake. A wave of relief crashed over me so powerfully that tears instantly filled my eyes. I rushed toward her bedside. I wanted to hold her hand. I wanted to tell her everything would be okay. I wanted to hear her voice again. But then I saw her reaction, and my feet stopped moving. Emma looked at me, not with excitement, not with relief, not with the joy I had prayed for during 72 endless hours. She looked terrified. She pulled herself deeper beneath the hospital blanket. Her small body trembled. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She stared at me as if I were a stranger, as if I were someone dangerous. My heart shattered. "Emma," I whispered. "It's Daddy." She immediately flinched. The movement felt like a knife through my chest. Her frightened eyes never left mine. Then, through the oxygen mask, she struggled to speak. The words came out broken and weak, barely more than whispers. But every syllable crushed me. Grandma. She paused to catch her breath. Grandma said. A tear rolled down her face. Grandma said, "You're angry because of me." I felt my stomach drop. Emma's voice shook. She said, "Mommy left because I made everyone unhappy." Another sob escaped her lips. She said, "You don't really want me anymore." The room seemed to spin around me. I couldn't breathe. Emma continued speaking through tears. She said, "If I told people I was scared of you," her voice broke completely, "then everyone would be happy again." For several seconds I couldn't move. Couldn't think, couldn't speak. The nightmare was even worse than I had imagined. Patricia hadn't simply lied about me. She had targeted a frightened child waking from a coma. She had filled Emma's mind with guilt, fear, shame. She had tried to convince my daughter that she was the reason our family was broken, that she was unwanted, that her own father didn't love her. I sank into the chair beside her bed. Tears blurred my vision. Slowly I reached out my hand. This time I didn't move any closer. I simply waited, and after several agonizing seconds, Emma looked at me. Really looked at me. Past the fear, past the confusion, past the poison someone else had poured into her heart. Then her tiny fingers stretched toward mine. The moment her hand touched mine, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was no longer about family drama. No longer about money. No longer about lies on social media. Someone had deliberately emotionally manipulated a critically ill child, and I was going to make sure the truth came to light, no matter who stood in my way. I rushed to Emma's bedside. I moved as gently as I could, afraid of frightening her even more. I reached for her tiny hand, but she pulled it back slightly. Her eyes filled with tears. Warm tears rolled down her swollen cheeks. She looked at me with a mixture of fear, confusion, and heartbreak. Carefully, I adjusted her oxygen mask so I could hear her better. Her voice was weak and trembling. Every word came out in fragments. Then she asked a question that shattered my heart into pieces. "Daddy, do you want to leave me because I'm sick?" For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to disappear around me. I gently held her face in my hands. "No, sweetheart," my voice cracked. "No. Never." I looked straight into her eyes. "I love you more than my own life." Tears streamed down my face. "I've been right here for 3 days. I've been waiting for you to wake up." I wasn't going anywhere, but Emma kept crying. Then the frightened 8-year-old began telling me what had happened. When she first started waking up, she hadn't seen me. The only person beside her bed was Patricia. Her grandmother had leaned close and whispered into her ear. Patricia told her that I was tired of taking care of a sick child. She claimed I wanted someone else to adopt Emma so I could enjoy my life without responsibilities. She told Emma that if I returned, she shouldn't beg to stay with me anymore because I didn't need her. Every word felt like poison. Every sentence revealed a level of cruelty I could barely comprehend. My mother had deliberately planted doubt inside the heart of a frightened child. She had chosen the exact moment Emma was weakest. The exact moment she was vulnerable and confused. Patricia wanted to destroy the only source of emotional security my daughter had. Her goal was suddenly obvious. She wanted Emma to reject me. She wanted Emma to willingly go with Jessica. And she wanted to use the emotional wounds of an innocent child as a weapon in a future custody battle. I wrapped my arms around Emma and held her tightly. We cried together. I explained that everything Patricia had said was a lie. I promised her that I would never abandon her. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. I pointed toward the metal chair beside her bed. The same chair where I had spent 3 sleepless nights. I showed her the marks on my hands from holding hers for hours at a time. I told her how terrified I had been of losing her. Emma stared at me for a long time. The room was silent except for the steady sounds of the medical equipment. Then something changed in her eyes. The love between a father and daughter proved stronger than manipulation, stronger than lies, stronger than fear. Emma suddenly burst into tears and threw her arms around my neck. "I believe you, Daddy." I closed my eyes. For the first time in days, I felt relief. Then she whispered something that sent another wave of anger through me. "I'm scared of Grandma." The fire inside me became something different. Until that moment, I had been defending myself. Now I was defending my daughter. There was no room left for hesitation. No room left for weakness. My silence had allowed these people to hurt us for far too long. I wiped Emma's tears away. Then I looked directly into her eyes. I promise you something. She nodded. I'm going to protect you. My voice became firm, and the people who hurt you will be held accountable. Emma squeezed my hand. Slowly, I helped her settle back onto the bed. Within minutes, exhaustion pulled her into a peaceful sleep. I stayed beside her for a while longer, watching, thinking, planning. When I finally stepped into the hallway, I was no longer the broken man who had sat helplessly beside that hospital bed 3 days earlier. I pulled out my phone. Then I made a call. It was time to fight back. I needed legal protection. I needed evidence. I needed the truth documented before Patricia and Jessica could erase their tracks. But to win, I would need something more powerful than anger. I would need proof. And gathering that proof would require a dangerous investigation inside the very circle of people trying to destroy me. What I didn't know yet was that the first crack in their carefully constructed lies would come from the most unexpected source imaginable. A person nobody suspected. A person who had been silently watching everything. And the information they possessed would expose Patricia's true face in a way no one could deny. If you've stayed with this story all the way to this point, then it must have captured your attention. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. Leave a comment with the number 5 so I know you've made it this far, and tell me how you think this story will end. I'd love to see your predictions and find out who gets it right. Many people watch without doing so, but it costs nothing and means a great deal to us. I walked out of the hospital room with a determination I had never felt before. The man who had spent years avoiding conflict was gone. He had disappeared the moment I saw the terror in Emma's eyes. I could no longer stand by while they destroyed our lives. This time I was going to fight back. And I was going to do it with facts, with evidence, with the truth. My first call was to attorney Linda. She was one of the most respected family law attorneys in the state and an old friend. After listening to everything that had happened, she remained silent for several seconds. Then she delivered a blunt assessment. We need evidence. Her voice was firm. Not suspicions. Not emotions. Evidence. According to Linda, Patricia and Jessica had built their entire strategy around lies. The only way to defeat them was to expose those lies with undeniable proof. I immediately began gathering everything I could. My next meeting was with Dr. Williams, the physician who had overseen Emma's treatment from the moment she arrived at the hospital. When he heard what Patricia had done, his expression darkened. He agreed to prepare an official medical statement. The document detailed Emma's critical condition upon admission. It confirmed the life-threatening circumstances surrounding her hospitalization. It also documented the complete absence of Jessica and Patricia during the most dangerous hours of Emma's medical crisis. Most importantly, Dr. Williams agreed to provide a formal report regarding the unauthorized ICU visit and its potential psychological impact on a recovering child patient. Next, I contacted my supervisor, Frank. He wasn't just my boss. He was someone I trusted. Without hesitation, he agreed to provide employment verification, payroll records, and documentation of my work history. Those records proved I maintained stable employment, consistent income, and a secure living situation. Everything Stephanie had written online about me being irresponsible and unable to care for my daughter was demonstrably false. Then came the most important piece of evidence: Grandpa Harold's envelope. Linda and I visited the bank together. We requested transaction histories and supporting documentation. One by one, the transfers were verified. Every payment Harold had sent to Patricia carried notes explaining its purpose. Money for Monroe's debt, tuition assistance for Emma, emergency family support. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Harold had been manipulated repeatedly. As the financial investigation expanded, an even more disturbing discovery emerged. Patricia had used part of the money she obtained from Harold to hire a private investigator. For over a month, she had been paying someone to monitor my activities. The goal was simple. She wanted dirt, anything she could use against me in court. Any mistake, any embarrassing moment, any vulnerability. She had spent her father's retirement savings trying to destroy her own son. I sat at Linda's office holding the reports. My hands felt cold. The woman who raised me had been planning this for months. Perhaps even longer. She had lied to her father, manipulated a child, coordinated with my ex-wife, funded surveillance against me. And now every one of those actions was becoming evidence. Linda reviewed the growing stack of documents. Then she smiled. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw confidence in her eyes. They built this case on fraud. She closed the folder, and fraud leaves fingerprints. Everything was finally coming together. Evidence of financial exploitation. Evidence of emotional abuse. Evidence of child manipulation. Evidence of coordinated deception. The truth was stronger than their lies. For the first time, I believed we might actually win. That night I stood beside the hospital window. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass. Emma was asleep, peaceful, recovering. And for the first time in days, I wasn't afraid. I was angry, focused, ready. The courtroom battle was approaching, and Patricia and Jessica had no idea how much evidence was already waiting for them. But just when I thought I had uncovered the full extent of their scheme, something unexpected happened. The evening before the hearing, a package arrived at Grandpa Harold's hotel. There was no return address, no identifying information. Inside was a small memory card. Nothing else. No letter, no explanation. Just the card. A chill ran through me. Linda immediately copied the contents onto a secure laptop. The screen loaded a single audio file. We exchanged nervous glances. Then she pressed play. Static filled the speakers. Several seconds passed. Then two voices emerged. The moment I heard them, my blood turned to ice. Patricia. Jessica. The recording appeared to have been made secretly. Neither woman seemed aware they were being recorded. At first, they discussed routine legal matters. Then the conversation took a darker turn. A much darker turn. Patricia's voice became sharp, calculating, cold. Jessica sounded nervous, as if she wasn't completely comfortable with what she was hearing. Then Patricia said something that made everyone in the room go silent. If the judge starts believing him, we use Emma. Jessica hesitated. What exactly do you mean? Patricia replied immediately. We make sure the child says she's afraid of her father. The room around me seemed to disappear. Jessica lowered her voice. That's dangerous. Patricia laughed. A short, chilling laugh. Not if it's done correctly. My hands clenched into fists. The recording continued, and with every passing second the plan they intended to execute inside the courtroom became more horrifying. By the time the audio ended, Linda had gone completely pale. Grandpa Harold was staring at the floor in disbelief. And I realized something terrifying. The custody battle had never been about Emma's welfare. It had never been about family. It had never even been about revenge. There was another objective hidden beneath everything. And whatever Patricia and Jessica were planning to do in court, it was so extreme that even they knew it would destroy any chance of reconciliation forever. The courtroom that day felt suffocating. Harsh fluorescent lights reflected off polished wooden benches. Across the aisle sat Patricia and Jessica. They were dressed elegantly, confident, composed, certain of victory. Stephanie sat in the gallery behind them with a smug smile spread across her face. They truly believed their lies had worked. The social media smear campaign, the fabricated statements, the forged documents, they thought they had already won. When the hearing began, Jessica's attorney rose confidently. His presentation was polished and dramatic. He described me as an irresponsible father. He referenced social media posts and statements from relatives who claimed I had isolated Emma and forced her to live in poor conditions. Beside him, Jessica dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, performing for the courtroom, pretending to cry, pretending to care. When the attorney finally sat down, the judge turned toward me. Do you have evidence to dispute these claims? I stood. My hands were steady. My voice was calm. I looked directly at my mother, then at Jessica, and I told the court that every accusation against me was a deliberate lie. I nodded toward Attorney Linda. The real battle was about to begin. Linda approached the bench. The first piece of evidence was the medical certification prepared by Dr. Williams. The report detailed Emma's critical condition upon arrival at the hospital. It documented that I remained at her bedside throughout the medical emergency. It also documented something else. Jessica's complete absence. Patricia's complete absence. Neither woman had appeared during the most dangerous hours of Emma's life. The next exhibit was even more damaging. The courtroom screens displayed footage from the hospital security cameras. Everyone watched as Patricia secretly entered the ICU while Emma was recovering. Everyone watched as she leaned over the child's bed and whispered into her ear. The courtroom became silent. Patricia's face immediately lost color. She attempted to stand. She opened her mouth to explain, but the judge struck the gavel and ordered her to remain seated. The damage had already been done. Then Linda introduced the financial records, bank statements, transfer histories, withdrawal documentation. Every payment Harold had sent to Patricia was traced and verified. The records clearly showed the explanations attached to the transfers. Money supposedly intended to help me. Money supposedly intended for Emma. Money Patricia had taken under false pretenses. When Harold took the witness stand, the atmosphere changed completely. The elderly man looked directly at the judge. Then he told the truth. His own daughter had used her grandson's name to deceive him. She had manipulated his fears. She had stolen from him. Murmurs spread throughout the courtroom. Patricia looked as though she wanted to disappear. But the final blow was still waiting. Linda turned toward me. I understood immediately. I reached into my briefcase and removed the memory card. The anonymous recording. The room became silent as the audio began playing. Patricia's voice echoed through the speakers. Jessica's voice followed. Neither woman sounded concerned about Emma's welfare. Instead, they discussed strategy, manipulation, false evidence, pressure tactics. And then the most devastating truth emerged. The entire custody battle had been a scheme, a means to force me into surrendering my claim to my late father's house, a property Patricia desperately wanted sold. The money, according to the recording, was intended to solve massive gambling debts connected to Stephanie. Every word echoed through the courtroom. Every lie collapsed. Every mask fell away. Patricia's confidence vanished. Jessica's expression turned pale. Stephanie's victorious smile disappeared. The three women who had spent months presenting themselves as victims now sat exposed before everyone. When the recording ended, the courtroom remained silent for several seconds. Then chaos erupted. Patricia began crying, then pleading, then denying everything. Jessica repeatedly shook her head. Stephanie stared at the floor. None of it mattered anymore. The evidence spoke louder than any excuse. After reviewing the evidence, the judge issued a final ruling. Jessica permanently lost her custody petition. Her visitation rights were severely restricted because of her role in the emotional manipulation of a child. Patricia's situation was even worse. Investigators had already been notified regarding the financial fraud involving Harold. As officers approached her seat, she finally realized the consequences were real. The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. For a moment she looked directly at me. The arrogance was gone. Only panic remained. I felt no joy, no satisfaction, only relief. The truth had finally won. Emma was safe. That was all that mattered. Without looking back, I walked out of the courtroom. Behind me, I could still hear shouting, crying, desperate pleas. But that chapter of my life was over. Or so I thought. As I stepped outside the courthouse, my phone suddenly vibrated. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, I answered. A calm voice spoke from the other end. The caller identified themselves as a representative from a hospital in another city. Then they mentioned Stephanie's name. The words that followed stopped me in my tracks. According to the caller, Stephanie had been admitted several days earlier under emergency circumstances. And during the hospital's investigation into her financial records and insurance information, they had uncovered something that connected directly to Patricia. Something hidden for years. Something far bigger than gambling debts. As I listened, I slowly realized that the destruction of that family had not ended inside the courtroom. The collapse was only beginning, and what was about to surface next would be far more devastating than anything revealed during the trial. I looked down at my phone. The caller was an employee from a private hospital. They informed me that my sister Stephanie had recently been attacked by creditors who had tracked her down at her home. Her luxurious mansion had been seized and placed under legal restriction. Her husband had filed for divorce immediately after learning about Patricia's arrest. The truth about Stephanie's enormous gambling debts had finally come to light. The perfect family they had spent years pretending to be had completely fallen apart. It was the price of greed, the price of cruelty. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I felt no sympathy, but I felt no hatred either. Instead, there was an unexpected sense of peace. I stepped down the courthouse stairs. Warm morning sunlight stretched across the walkway. At the bottom of the steps stood Grandpa Harold. Beside him was Emma. She had finally been discharged from the hospital. The color had returned to her cheeks. The bright smile on her face seemed to erase every dark moment we had endured. The moment she saw me, she ran forward. I scooped her into my arms and held her tightly. Harold watched us with a proud smile. A new chapter of our lives began that day. The three of us moved to a quiet small town, a place filled with green trees, clean air, and peaceful streets. Every morning I walked Emma to school. Every evening the three of us prepared dinner together. There were no more manipulative voices, no more lies, no more schemes. Only laughter. Only peace. After surviving that nightmare, I learned a lesson that changed my life forever. Real family is not defined by blood. It is defined by protection, by sacrifice, by genuine love. Sometimes the people who share your blood are the very people most willing to betray you. And sometimes the people who truly love you are the ones who stand beside you when your world is falling apart. Learn to recognize who genuinely deserves a place in your life. Never surrender to emotional manipulation. Not from strangers, not from friends, and not even from relatives. Because love should never require fear. As I carried Emma toward our car, she wrapped her arms around my neck and rested her head on my shoulder. For the first time, in a very long time, the future felt bright. The storm was finally over, and peace had won. Thank you for joining us on Dad's Real Life Revenge. Don't forget to share your own story in the comments and be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss future stories and lessons. We'll see you in the next video.